December 17, 1944. Belgium's Ardennes Forest. Oberstfreiter Hans Müller huddled in his frozen foxhole, scribbling words into his diary that would torment him for decades to come. The Americans aren't like the Russians. Their artillery is something entirely different. It's not about volume of fire, though that's terrible enough. It's the speed, the precision, the certainty that you have zero time to react. 1 second there's silence. The next, the world explodes. Through that morning's thick fog, Müller had witnessed something that demolished every belief German soldiers held about American military prowess. His battalion, part of the 6th SS Panzer Army, had just initiated Hitler's final Western gamble. They'd achieved total surprise against weakly defended American positions. Victory appeared inevitable. Then American artillery located them. What Müller couldn't know, what no German soldier pushing through those snow-blanketed forests could comprehend, was that they were colliding with the most lethal artillery system ever fielded in combat. A system so sophisticated, so devastating, and so perfectly coordinated that it would shatter Germany's last offensive and expose the true extent of American military dominance. The breakdown had started long before the Battle of the Bulge. Throughout 1943 and 1944, German veterans rotating from the Eastern Front to engage American forces in Italy, France, and the Low Countries brought assumptions forged in brutal combat against Soviet artillery. They'd mastered survival against Russian bombardments through bitter experience. The Soviets would fire ranging rounds, providing German troops valuable seconds to find shelter. Shells arrived in predictable sequences, permitting movement between salvos. Fire direction was typically sluggish, consuming 10 to 15 minutes from observation to shell impact. The Americans were different, horrifyingly different. Gefreiter Otto Schmidt, a 2-year Eastern Front veteran captured with the Afrika Korps in Tunisia during May 1943, would later recount his first American artillery encounter in a post-war interview. We'd positioned ourselves in a wadi north of Tunis. Excellent concealment, we thought. The Russians would have needed an hour to locate us and another to range their guns. We felt secure enough to brew morning coffee. Then we spotted it, a small aircraft, no larger than a reconnaissance plane, puttering overhead at maybe 500 meters altitude. We barely noticed. Such planes carried no armament. We figured it was conducting photography. 3 minutes later, without warning, without ranging rounds, without any indication whatsoever, the entire wadi erupted. Shells landing simultaneously, not sequentially. Air bursts above us, ground bursts among us. In 30 seconds, my company ceased existing as a fighting unit. I was among 11 survivors from 123 men. The aircraft Schmidt observed was an L-4 Grasshopper, the American forward observer's flying platform. These modest Piper Cubs would become the Wehrmacht's most dreaded aircraft. Not for weapons they carried, but for what followed their appearance. German soldiers learned a harsh lesson. When you saw a Grasshopper overhead, you had minutes, perhaps only seconds, before American artillery transformed your position into a slaughter zone. Lieutenant Friedrich Bauer, an artillery officer who directed counter-battery fire on the Eastern Front, documented his amazement in letters discovered decades later in German military archives. I studied American artillery procedures from captured documents. Initially, I assumed these documents were deception, propaganda meant to intimidate. No artillery system could perform as described. The coordination required would be impossible. Then I witnessed it personally. Near Cannes, an American Grasshopper appeared. We tracked it, preparing to displace our guns per standard procedure. Before we could relocate, before we'd even calculated firing data for counter-battery fire, American shells were landing on our position. Not random fire, not area saturation, precise fire on each gun. They'd calculated firing solutions, coordinated multiple batteries at different ranges, and delivered simultaneous fire in less time than it took our own forward observers to radio map coordinates to our fire direction center. The secret to American artillery supremacy wasn't a single innovation. It was a comprehensive system integrating technology, training, and industrial capacity at levels Germany could never replicate. The foundation was the Fire Direction Center, a concept that revolutionized artillery employment, where German artillery batteries calculated firing solutions individually. American batteries fed all data to a centralized FDC that could coordinate fire from dozens of batteries simultaneously. The FDC system relied on pre-computed firing tables. In offices throughout the United States, rooms filled with women-operated mechanical calculators, slide rules, and logarithm tables, computing firing solutions for every conceivable variable combination: wind speed and direction, temperature, humidity, barrel wear, propellant temperature, altitude differences between gun and target. These tables, printed in books compact enough to fit in a map case, enabled American fire direction officers to calculate precise firing solutions in minutes rather than hours. Hauptmann Werner Hoffmann, a mathematics professor conscripted into Wehrmacht artillery, examined captured American firing tables after the war. His analysis, preserved in German military records, revealed his shocked admiration. These tables represent years of computational labor, thousands of hours on mechanical calculators. They'd computed solutions for every variable we might encounter in the field. Our own firing tables were primitive by comparison, requiring extensive field calculations for each mission. The Americans had completed the mathematics in advance. In the field, they simply consulted the answer. But tables alone couldn't explain American artillery's devastating effectiveness. The true revolution was time on target, a firing technique so advanced that few nations possessed the capability to execute it. Time on target, universally known as TOT, coordinated artillery fire so that shells from multiple batteries, fired at different times based on their distance from the target, arrived simultaneously within a 3-second window. The effect was catastrophic. German soldiers experienced no warning, no ranging shots, no gradual fire buildup. One instant, silence. The next instant, dozens of shells detonating simultaneously. Troops in the open, whose survival against conventional artillery depended on dropping prone at the first explosion, had no time to react. Studies conducted post-war revealed that 66% of artillery casualties occurred in the first few seconds of a barrage. Time on target maximized casualties by eliminating warning. Stabsfeldwebel Kurt Zimmermann, who survived TOT strikes during the Battle of the Bulge, wrote in his diary, discovered by American forces in a captured command post. It's not artillery as we understand it. It's something new. You hear nothing. Then the world ends. Every shell arrives in the same second. The air bursts kill men who'd survive ground bursts. The ground bursts kill men who'd survive air bursts. There's no time to dive for cover, no time to reach a hole, no time even to drop flat. You're simply alive one moment and wounded or dead the next. The speed of American artillery response stunned German commanders. German artillery, considered among the world's finest, could deliver fire in 8 to 10 minutes under ideal conditions. American artillery routinely delivered accurate fire in 3 minutes. This speed derived from multiple factors. American forward observers used new FM radios providing clear, static-free communication. German forces still relied primarily on AM radios plagued by interference. American radios were also far more numerous. Every infantry battalion had multiple radio-equipped forward observers. German battalions typically had 1 or 2 radios, often shared between units. The forward observers themselves represented another American advantage. German forward observers were artillery officers, often lacking infantry training or experience. American forward observers were specially trained personnel who understood both artillery and infantry tactics. They moved with infantry units, lived with infantry soldiers, and coordinated fire as an integrated part of combined arms operations. Moreover, American artillery observers could call upon an entire corps artillery, not just their own battalion. The system allowed a single forward observer to coordinate fire from dozens of batteries within minutes. A lieutenant calling for fire support could bring down the weight of metal equivalent to a small air strike, delivered more accurately and more rapidly than any air support could provide. Oberstleutnant Heinrich Müller, commander of an infantry regiment destroyed near St. Lo in July 1944, documented this capability in his final report. A single American infantry company, surrounded in a village, held my entire regiment for 6 hours. Every time we attempted to assault, artillery fire drove us back. Not from one battery, but from what seemed like dozens of batteries. The forward observer with that company, probably a lieutenant or captain, commanded more firepower than I could bring to bear with my entire regimental artillery. We lost 400 men attempting to overrun 120 Americans. We failed. The artillery pieces themselves demonstrated American industrial superiority. The M2A1 105mm howitzer, the standard American light artillery piece, was a marvel of engineering and manufacturing. Rock Island Arsenal had perfected production techniques, allowing rapid manufacturing to precise tolerances. By World War II's end, 8,536 M2A1 howitzers had been produced. Each American infantry division had 36 of these howitzers organized into 3 battalions of 12 guns each. These battalions were fully motorized, towed by trucks or half-tracks that could move at highway speeds. Displacement from one firing position to another, an evolution that took German horse-drawn artillery 2 to 3 hours, took American motorized batteries 20 to 30 minutes. The mobility contrast was stark. German artillery remained predominantly horse-drawn throughout the war. Despite Nazi propaganda showcasing mechanized panzer divisions, approximately 80% of German motive power relied on horses for transport. Germany started World War II with 514,000 horses and ended with 1,198,000 by February 1945. Each German artillery piece required 6 to 8 horses and took hours to limber, move, and unlimber. In winter conditions, movement became nearly impossible. Gefreiter Paul Richter, assigned to a German artillery battery in Normandy, kept a detailed diary that survived the war. We watched American artillery displace during a battle. They fired their mission. Then trucks appeared. Within 20 minutes, the entire battery had limbered their guns and departed. We required 2 hours minimum to perform the same evolution, and that assumed good weather and roads. In mud or under fire, we might need 4 hours. The Americans would set up at a new position and be ready to fire again before we'd finished moving. We were fighting a 19th century war with horses against an enemy fighting a 20th century war with trucks. The outcome was inevitable. American 155mm howitzers provided even more devastating fire support. Each division had 12 M1 155mm howitzers in a separate battalion. These guns, firing 43 kilogram shells to ranges exceeding 14,000 meters, provided the division commander with a heavy punch capable of destroying fortifications that would survive smaller caliber fire. The 155mm was itself a triumph of engineering. Designed in the late 1930s and standardized in May 1941, it combined range, accuracy, and reliability. 10,300 were produced during the war. The gun could be towed at highway speeds by a truck or half-track, allowing rapid displacement. Rate of fire was 4 rounds per minute, though well-trained crews could briefly achieve 6 rounds per minute. But even these divisional assets paled beside the artillery available at Corps and Army level. American Corps artillery typically included battalions of 155mm guns, 8-inch howitzers, and even massive 240mm howitzers. These weapons, capable of destroying any fortification, could be called upon by forward observers at battalion level. The pyramiding of firepower meant a single rifle company could, within minutes, bring down fire from divisional, corps, and even army artillery. German artillery, by contrast, was rigidly organized. Corps and army artillery were separate commands, not available to support divisional operations without extensive coordination and approval through multiple headquarters. German infantry divisions had their own artillery, but calling fire from corps artillery required routing requests through division to corps, often taking hours for approval. By the time fire arrived, if it arrived at all, American mobile warfare had moved the front line. Lieutenant Joachim Weber, a forward observer who had requested Corps artillery support during the Normandy campaign, documented his frustration. I called for Corps artillery at 0915 hours. The enemy was massing tanks for an assault on our position. I provided exact coordinates, described the target, explained the tactical situation. At 1330 hours, 4 hours later, I finally received fire. 3 salvos. By that time, the American tanks had completed their attack and withdrawn. Our position was overrun. I survived only by luck. The Corps artillery, which might have saved us, arrived too late to matter. The technical sophistication of American artillery extended to the ammunition itself. While Germany struggled with propellant shortages and inconsistent shell production, American industry delivered ammunition in seemingly unlimited quantities, manufactured to precise specifications, ensuring consistent performance. More significantly, the Americans deployed the variable time fuse, the VT fuse, a technological marvel that would prove decisive. The VT fuse, also called the proximity fuse, contained a miniature radar transmitter and receiver in the artillery shell's nose. The transmitter broadcast a radio signal. When the shell approached the ground or any object, the reflected signal triggered detonation. The result was a shell that exploded at optimal height for maximum lethality, typically 10 to 20 meters above the ground. The VT fuse transformed artillery effectiveness. Conventional time fuses required calculating the precise time to target, then setting the fuse accordingly. Wind, temperature, barrel wear all affected shell flight time. Even small errors meant shells exploding too high or burying themselves in the ground before detonation. The VT fuse eliminated these variables, guaranteeing optimal air burst regardless of conditions. The VT fuse had first been used in combat by the USS Helena on January 5, 1943, shooting down a Japanese dive bomber off Guadalcanal with only 2 to 3 salvos. Throughout 1943 and 1944, VT fuses proved devastatingly effective in naval anti-aircraft operations and against V-1 flying bombs over England. However, concerns about the technology falling into German hands prevented its use in ground artillery over Europe. General Dwight Eisenhower personally requested permission to employ VT fuses during the Battle of the Bulge, arguing that their effectiveness justified the security risk. The Pentagon initially refused, but Eisenhower protested vehemently. Formal authorization came on December 19 to 21, 1944, shortly after the German offensive began. This marked the first use of VT fuses against ground troops in the European theater. The decision proved correct. VT fuse shells devastated German formations caught in the open during the Ardennes offensive. Naval anti-aircraft tests had shown VT fuses were 3 to 4 times more effective than conventional fuses against V-1 flying bombs. VT fuses destroyed 79% of all incoming targets. The lethal fragment area was 3,000 square feet versus 60 square feet for conventional fuses. Some estimates suggested VT fuses increased artillery effectiveness by 200 to 700%. Troops who had learned to survive conventional artillery by seeking any depression in the ground discovered that VT fuses negated such cover. The shells exploded above them, showering downward with deadly fragments that struck men prone in shallow holes. Oberstleutnant Hans Muller, whose diary opened this account, survived a VT fuse barrage and recorded his experience. We had learned on the Eastern Front to go flat at the first explosion. Even shallow depressions offered protection from fragments traveling horizontally. But these shells, these demon shells as we call them, exploded above us. The fragments came down like rain. Men in foxholes, men who should have been protected, were killed by fragments that fell vertically. There was no defense except deep bunkers, and we had no time to dig deep bunkers. We simply died. The psychological impact of VT fuses compounded their physical effects. German soldiers trained to respond to artillery by seeking cover found their training irrelevant. The knowledge that no cover short of overhead protection would save them induced paralysis. Some units refused to leave defensive positions, even under direct orders, because movement in the open meant certain death if American artillery engaged them. Hauptmann Friedrich Bauer documented a near mutiny in his unit during the final weeks of the Ardennes offensive. My company was ordered to attack an American position 300 meters distant. The men refused. They had seen what American artillery did to troops in the open, especially with these new fuses that burst in air. I tried to explain that we would die anyway if we didn't attack, that the Americans would eventually overrun our position. The men wouldn't move. They preferred the possibility of capture to the certainty of death under American artillery fire. The industrial capacity that produced American artillery and ammunition in such quantities represented another dimension of superiority that German soldiers couldn't comprehend. Rock Island Arsenal alone produced over 10,105 mm howitzers. Multiple factories produced 155 mm howitzers and heavier weapons. Shell production reached staggering levels throughout the war. German production, hampered by Allied bombing, resource shortages, and inefficient allocation of industrial capacity, never approached American levels. German artillery pieces were often superior in design to their American counterparts, but Germany produced them in insufficient numbers and lacked the industrial capacity to maintain production as the war continued. By 1944, German artillery batteries often operated at half strength, with guns destroyed or worn out and no replacements available. More critically, German ammunition production couldn't sustain intensive operations. German artillery batteries were often limited to minimal daily allowances, sometimes as few as 2 to 3 shells per gun per day. American batteries faced no such restrictions. Forward observers could call for fire freely, knowing that ammunition supply was effectively unlimited. Lieutenant Werner Vogel, a German artillery officer, documented the ammunition crisis in his war diary. We received 50 shells per gun for the entire week. 50 shells to support an infantry regiment facing continuous American attacks. I was required to justify each fire mission to battalion, explaining why this particular target merited expenditure of irreplaceable ammunition. Meanwhile, American artillery fired thousands of shells daily with no apparent concern for conservation. We fought a poor man's war against a rich man's enemy. The disparity in ammunition supply manifested in tactical doctrine. German artillery doctrine emphasized mass fire on high-value targets, delivered only after careful planning and approval. American doctrine emphasized responsive fire, immediately available to support infantry operations. An American infantry platoon leader could request and receive artillery support within minutes. A German platoon leader might wait hours for fire, if he received any at all. The logistics of ammunition supply further highlighted American advantages. American artillery was fully motorized, supplied by truck convoys that could deliver thousands of shells to forward positions within hours. German artillery, horse-drawn and often dependent on rail transport for long-distance movement, struggled to maintain adequate forward stocks. As Allied air power interdicted German rail networks, ammunition supply became increasingly difficult. American logistics also benefited from standardization. The M1 shell fired by 105 mm howitzers used the same fuse as shells fired by 155 mm howitzers and larger calibers. This standardization simplified supply, reduced inventory requirements, and ensured that fuses were always available. German ammunition production, plagued by multiple fuse designs and caliber variants, suffered chronic shortages of specific components, even when overall production remained adequate. The superiority of American artillery created a cascading effect on German tactical options. German commanders, knowing that massing forces would draw devastating artillery fire, dispersed their units. But dispersed units lacked combat power and could be defeated piecemeal. Concentrated forces could generate combat power, but became targets for American artillery. Either choice led to defeat. The Ardennes offensive, Germany's final major attack in the West, demonstrated these dynamics with brutal clarity. German planning depended on fog and overcast weather to neutralize American air power. The planners correctly assessed that American aircraft couldn't operate in bad weather. They failed to understand that American artillery didn't require good weather. During the opening days of the offensive, German armored and infantry divisions achieved significant penetrations against surprised American forces. Over 200,000 German troops and approximately 1,000 tanks launched the initial assault on December 16, 1944. Then American artillery found them, lacking the mobility to rapidly displace when taken under fire. German horse-drawn artillery batteries were destroyed in place, lacking the ammunition reserves to engage in sustained counter-battery fire. German guns fell silent while American guns continued to fire. Stabsfeldwebel Kurt Zimmermann, whose diary provides extensive detail on German artillery operations during the Bulge, recorded the disparity. Our battery was located in woods south of St. Vith. We had 50 shells per gun, our entire allocation for the operation. We fired a mission in support of our infantry. Within 10 minutes, American counter-battery fire destroyed 3 of our 6 guns and killed most of the horses. We attempted to displace the remaining guns, but lacked horses to move them. We abandoned the guns and withdrew on foot. This was the pattern across the entire front. Our artillery was silenced, while American artillery continued to fire without pause. At Bastogne, American artillery ammunition was actually restricted to only 10 rounds per gun per day on December 22 due to shortages. Despite this constraint, American artillery proved decisive in breaking German attacks around the surrounded town. When the weather cleared after Christmas, supply resumed and American artillery fire intensified dramatically. During the entire Bulge campaign, 4,155 American guns fired 1,255,000 artillery rounds. German units that had penetrated 50 kilometers into American lines found themselves trapped, surrounded by American forces that could call upon unlimited artillery support once resupply resumed. Oberstleutnant Heinrich Müller, whose regiment had been destroyed at St. Lo 6 months earlier, commanded a replacement regiment during the Bulge. His final report, written in a prisoner-of-war camp after his capture in January 1945, provides a stark assessment. We were defeated by American artillery before we were defeated by American infantry or armor. Every movement we made was observed by their aircraft and engaged by their artillery. Every concentration of forces was broken up by artillery fire before we could attack. Every defensive position was smashed by artillery before their infantry assaulted. We couldn't move, couldn't mass, couldn't defend. We simply absorbed artillery fire until we ceased to exist as an effective force. The offensive, planned to drive through to Antwerp and split Allied armies, stalled after less than a week, broken primarily by American artillery. Units that began the offensive at full strength ended it with 30 to 40% casualties, with artillery fire accounting for the majority of losses. The lessons learned by German soldiers who survived American artillery came too late to change the war's outcome. Those captured and sent to prisoner-of-war camps in the United States discovered that the artillery system that had destroyed their units represented just one aspect of American military capability. The industrial capacity that produced tens of thousands of artillery pieces and millions of shells was the same capacity producing tanks, aircraft, trucks, and every other implement of war in quantities that dwarfed German production. Gefreiter Otto Schmidt, captured in Tunisia and held at a camp in Texas, wrote in a letter that passed American censors, "I have seen American industry. I have watched trains carrying artillery pieces, hundreds of them, moving toward ports for shipment overseas. I have seen factories producing shells by the thousands. The Americans defeated us not through superior tactics or superior soldiers, though their tactics were good and their soldiers brave. They defeated us through sheer industrial might. They could afford to fire 100 shells where we fired 1. They could afford to lose equipment and replace it within days. We couldn't match this, could never match this, no matter how long we fought." The German prisoners of war who witnessed American artillery training exercises in the United States saw firsthand the professionalism and preparation that made the system so effective. American artillery crews trained constantly, practicing the coordination and communication that allowed time on target missions. Forward observers worked closely with infantry units, practicing the integration that made American combined arms operations so effective. Lieutenant Friedrich Bauer, the artillery officer captured in Italy, attended lectures at a prisoner of war camp where American artillery officers explained their methods. His notes, preserved in German archives, reveal his professional admiration. They have systematized everything we did by individual skill and initiative. Where we depended on talented artillery officers computing firing solutions through experience and calculation, they created tables that allow average officers to achieve the same results. Where we depended on good radio operators maintaining communication under difficult conditions, they produced radios so reliable that even minimally trained operators could maintain contact. They have taken the art of artillery and transformed it into an industrial process, repeatable and scalable. This is the secret of their success. The transformation of German prisoners extended beyond technical appreciation. Many realized that German propaganda about American military weakness had been completely false. The Americans they encountered, both as enemies on the battlefield and as captors in prison camps, demonstrated professional competence, industrial capability, and organizational skill that exceeded German capabilities in nearly every dimension. Oberstleutnant Hans Müller, whose diary chronicled his experiences in the Ardennes, was captured during the collapse of the German offensive. His later diary entries, written in a prisoner of war camp, reflect a complete reversal of his earlier beliefs. We were told the Americans were inferior soldiers, that they lacked fighting spirit, that they depended on material superiority because they lacked the skill and courage of German soldiers. These were lies. American soldiers fought with courage and skill, but they also fought with overwhelming material advantages that German courage and skill couldn't overcome. Most significantly, they fought with an artillery system so advanced that we had no effective counter. This, more than any other factor, defeated us. By early 1945, as Germany's situation became hopeless, American artillery superiority only increased. German ammunition production collapsed under Allied bombing. German artillery units lost experienced crews to casualties and received inadequate replacements. German horses, essential for moving artillery, died by thousands from overwork, lack of fodder, and American fire. German batteries that had operated with 6 guns at the war's beginning now operated with 2 or 3. Some divisions had no functional artillery at all. American artillery, by contrast, grew stronger. Production continued to accelerate even as the war in Europe approached its end. American factories produced more artillery pieces in 1944 than in any previous year. Ammunition production reached levels that allowed American forces to fire without restriction. New technologies, including improved fire direction computers and better radios, enhanced effectiveness further. The end came in May 1945 with Germany's unconditional surrender. In the final battles, American artillery demonstrated capabilities that seemed impossible just years earlier. Single battalions could deliver overwhelming firepower on demand. Multiple corps artillery could coordinate fire on area targets, saturating entire map grid squares with shells. Forward observers could call down destruction on any target within minutes, confident that accurate fire would arrive quickly. German survivors of these final battles carried with them profound respect for American artillery. Hauptmann Werner Hoffmann, the mathematics professor who had analyzed American firing tables, was captured in the Ruhr Pocket in April 1945. His final military report, written for American intelligence officers, provided professional analysis of American artillery effectiveness. The American artillery system represents the culmination of industrial-age warfare. They have applied industrial methods, mass production, standardization, and systematic training to create a weapon system of unprecedented effectiveness. Individual German artillery pieces may be superior in design. Individual German artillery officers may match American skill, but the Americans have created a system that doesn't depend on individual superiority. Their system produces consistent, overwhelming, rapidly delivered firepower regardless of individual skill levels. This systematization represents a revolution in warfare that Germany never matched and couldn't match given our industrial limitations. In the decades after the war, historians analyzing American military effectiveness in World War II identified artillery as perhaps the single most important advantage American forces possessed. While tanks and aircraft received public attention, it was artillery that broke German attacks, supported American advances, and inflicted substantial casualties in the Western theater. German military professionals studying their defeat after the war consistently identified American artillery superiority as a decisive factor. General Franz Halder, former chief of the German General Staff, wrote in his post-war analysis, "American artillery achieved what we believed impossible. They transformed artillery from a supporting arm into a dominant weapon system. Their coordination, their fire control, their logistics, and their industrial production created an artillery force that couldn't be matched or countered. German forces in the West operated under constant artillery threat, unable to mass without drawing devastating fire, unable to move without observation, unable to fight effectively under the weight of American shells." The tactical innovations developed by American artillery during World War II became the foundation for modern artillery doctrine. Time on target remains the standard method for coordinating artillery fires. Fire direction centers remain the hub of artillery operations. Forward observers, closely integrated with maneuver forces, remain essential for delivering responsive fire support. The basic structure established by the United States in World War II persists to this day. The proximity fuse represented such a significant advance that its full impact remained classified for years after the war. The psychological impact, combined with the physical casualties, often broke unit cohesion entirely. German soldiers caught in the open by VT fuse shells had no effective defense. For the German soldiers who faced American artillery, the experience left permanent impressions. Stabsfeldwebel Kurt Zimmermann, who survived multiple TOT barrages during the Bulge, immigrated to the United States in the 1950s. In a 1960 interview, he reflected on his wartime experiences. "I've been asked what weapon I feared most during the war. Not tanks, though German tanks were inferior to late-war American tanks. Not aircraft, though American air power was overwhelming. Not even American infantry, though they fought well. The weapon I feared most, the weapon that gave me nightmares then, and sometimes still does today, was American artillery. The sudden, devastating fire that arrived without warning. The knowledge that you might die without ever seeing your enemy, killed by shells fired from guns kilometers away. This was true terror." The story of German soldiers and American artillery is ultimately a story about the transformation of warfare in the industrial age. Individual courage and tactical skill remained important, but they were overshadowed by industrial production, systematic training, and organizational efficiency. The Americans had created a system that amplified the capabilities of average soldiers, making them more effective than exceptional German soldiers, fighting with inferior systems and inadequate support. The artillery that broke German forces in World War II wasn't the product of a single innovation or a brilliant individual. It was the product of systematic analysis, industrial application, comprehensive training, and abundant resources. It represented American military power at its most effective, using industrial capacity and organizational skill to create overwhelming combat power. For the German soldiers who faced this system, the experience was transformative. They entered the war believing in German superiority. They ended the war understanding that American industrial might and organizational capability had surpassed German capabilities. They had learned to fear American artillery above all other weapons, for it represented the unbridgeable gap between German methods and American industrial warfare. The American artillery system that devastated German forces in World War II didn't emerge overnight. It was the result of decades of doctrinal development, technological innovation, and, most importantly, the willingness to apply industrial-age thinking to military problems. Where European armies, including Germany, viewed artillery as a craft requiring individual skill and experience, Americans approached it as an engineering challenge that could be systematized, standardized, and scaled. This fundamental difference in philosophy explains why American artillery proved so superior despite German artillery pieces often being technically excellent designs. The Germans had better individual components, but an inferior system. The Americans had an integrated system that functioned flawlessly under the pressures of combat. The lessons learned extended far beyond artillery. American success in World War II demonstrated that modern warfare favored nations that could integrate technology, industrial production, and systematic training into cohesive combat systems. Individual heroism and tactical brilliance still mattered, but they mattered less than they had in previous wars. The German prisoners who witnessed American artillery in action, both on the battlefield and in training exercises in the United States, understood this transformation. They recognized that warfare had fundamentally changed, and that Germany's emphasis on individual excellence and tactical virtuosity couldn't overcome American systematic superiority. This realization extended to other aspects of American military power. German soldiers noted that American infantry squads had more automatic weapons than German squads. American tank battalions had dedicated recovery vehicles that could retrieve damaged tanks under fire. American supply systems delivered spare parts and replacement equipment with remarkable speed. Every aspect of American military organization reflected the same philosophy that governed their artillery: systematize, standardize, and scale. The psychological impact on German soldiers was profound. Veterans who had fought against Soviet forces on the Eastern Front consistently reported that American artillery was more feared than Russian artillery, despite the Soviets having more guns and firing more shells. The difference wasn't quantity, it was precision, speed, and the certainty that American artillery could find you anywhere, anytime, and destroy you before you could react. This psychological dominance had strategic implications. German units facing American forces often showed less fighting spirit than those facing Soviet forces. The knowledge that any concentration of troops would draw instant, devastating artillery fire discouraged aggressive action and encouraged surrender. Post-war interviews with German prisoners revealed that many considered capture by Americans preferable to continued combat under American artillery fire. The certainty of death under American shells outweighed the uncertainty of captivity. The industrial capacity that produced American artillery superiority continued to shape post-war military development. The United States maintained its emphasis on firepower, precision, and systematic integration of technology. Modern American artillery, while far more advanced technologically, still operates on the same fundamental principles established in World War II. Fire direction centers coordinate fires from multiple units. Forward observers, now with digital communications and GPS-guided munitions, still provide the eyes that direct artillery fire. Time on target remains a standard firing technique, now executed with computer precision rather than mechanical firing tables. The proximity fuse evolved into modern proximity sensors used in everything from anti-aircraft missiles to smart cluster munitions. The principle of using technology to guarantee optimal detonation regardless of conditions remains fundamental to modern munitions design. For Germany, the lessons of artillery defeat were absorbed into post-war Bundeswehr doctrine. Modern German artillery emphasizes mobility, rapid fire direction, and integration with other combat arms, all lessons learned from facing American artillery in World War II. The veterans who survived American artillery never forgot the experience. Their memoirs, diaries, and interviews consistently emphasize the helplessness they felt under American bombardment. The inability to fight back, the lack of warning, the certainty of death. These themes appear repeatedly in German accounts. Some German veterans expressed respect bordering on admiration for American artillery. They recognized the skill and sophistication required to create such an effective system. Others expressed bitterness at facing an enemy whose material superiority made German courage and skill irrelevant. All expressed relief that they survived. The story of American artillery in World War II stands as testament to what systematic thinking, industrial capacity, and comprehensive training can achieve. It demonstrates that victory in modern warfare depends less on individual heroism than on effective systems that allow average soldiers to achieve extraordinary results. The German soldiers who faced American artillery learned this lesson at terrible cost. Their experiences, preserved in diaries, letters, and post-war interviews, provide invaluable insight into the transformation of warfare in the industrial age. They faced not just an army, but an industrial system optimized for destruction. They fought not just soldiers, but a comprehensive military organization that had systematized every aspect of combat. They confronted not just weapons, but a philosophy of warfare that emphasized overwhelming firepower delivered with precision and speed. They lost. The American artillery system that defeated them represented the future of warfare, a future where technology, organization, and industrial might would matter more than traditional military virtues. The Germans had entered World War II as the world's most feared military power. They had revolutionized warfare with blitzkrieg tactics, combined armor and air power in unprecedented ways, and conquered most of Europe within 2 years. But they had failed to understand that warfare was evolving beyond tactics and operational art. The Americans understood that modern war was fundamentally an industrial and organizational challenge. Victory would belong to nations that could produce more, coordinate better, and sustain longer. American artillery embodied this understanding perfectly. It was the ultimate expression of industrial age warfare, systematic, scalable, and utterly devastating. For the German soldiers who faced it and survived, the experience was humbling. They had believed in German superiority. They had trusted in German weapons, German training, German tactical skill. They had assumed that courage and professionalism would overcome material disadvantages. American artillery taught them otherwise. The shells that fell without warning, the impossibility of effective defense, the constant fear of instant death from an enemy you couldn't see or fight. These experiences broke something fundamental in the German military psyche. They realized they weren't fighting fellow soldiers in a contest of skill and will. They were fighting an industrial process optimized for their destruction. And against such a process, there was no answer except surrender or death. This realization, that modern warfare had become industrialized slaughter rather than military contest, marked the end of traditional warfare and the beginning of something new. Something that German military tradition, with its emphasis on individual excellence and tactical virtuosity, was unprepared to face. The American artillery system proved that the future belonged not to the most skilled warriors, but to the most efficient organizations, not to the bravest soldiers, but to the most systematic militaries, not to superior tactics, but to superior logistics and industrial production. This was the lesson written in the craters that pockmarked Europe from Normandy to the Elbe. This was the truth that German soldiers learned too late to matter. American artillery didn't just defeat the Wehrmacht. It demonstrated that warfare itself had fundamentally changed, and that nations clinging to traditional military virtues would be crushed by nations that embraced industrial age methods. The German soldiers who survived carried this knowledge for the rest of their lives. Some accepted it with professional admiration for what the Americans had achieved. Others rejected it with bitterness at losing to what they saw as mere material superiority rather than true military skill. But all understood, whether they admitted it or not, that they had witnessed the future of warfare. And in that future, there was no place for armies that couldn't match American levels of organization, production, and systematic excellence. The thunder of American artillery that echoed across Europe from 1944 to 1945 was the sound of military history turning a corner. It was the sound of traditional warfare dying and industrial warfare being born. And for the German soldiers who heard that thunder and survived, It was a sound they would never forget.